If you could shrink down and step inside your own brain at midnight, you wouldn't find silence. You'd find a city switching shifts. The lights in the outside world districts dim, vision, movement, planning. But in the back offices, memory, emotion, maintenance, teams clock in. Some systems slow down, others become surprisingly busy. Sleep is not the brain going offline, it's the brain changing modes. Tonight, we're going to take a calm, documentary-style tour through that hidden night shift. We'll follow the brain from the moment you fall asleep through the deep stages where it stabilizes and protects what you learned, and into the strange theater of REM dreams. Along the way, we'll meet the circadian rhythm, the timing system that decides when sleep is most likely to happen, and the glymphatic system, a brain cleaning process that seems to ramp up during sleep. We'll keep this grounded and science-based, but we'll avoid making medical claims. Think of this as a guided explanation of what researchers believe sleep is doing, why it's organized in stages, and why your nights are not all the same. To begin, picture a typical evening. Your body is tired, but tiredness comes in at least two flavors. The first is sleep pressure. The longer you stay awake, the more your brain wants sleep. It's a slow buildup, like a weight on the eyelids, that grows across the day. The second is timing, your internal clock's opinion about whether right now is a good time to sleep. That internal clock is your circadian rhythm. Circadian simply means about a day. In humans, it's a roughly 24-hour rhythm that helps coordinate countless functions: alertness, body temperature, hormone release, and the tendency to feel sleepy or awake at different times. Deep in the brain, a small region in the hypothalamus, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, often described as a master clock, helps align that rhythm to the day-night cycle. Light is a key signal. When light enters the eyes, it doesn't just create vision. Some of that information is also used for timekeeping, helping the brain estimate whether it's morning, afternoon, or night. When it's dark, signals shift in a direction that supports nighttime physiology, including melatonin release patterns that are linked with the body's sense of night. We'll stay practical and non-clinical here. The main idea is that your brain uses light and darkness to keep your internal schedule roughly synced to the world. Now, when sleep finally arrives, it doesn't arrive as one uniform state. It arrives as a sequence. A common way to describe sleep is in two broad families: non-REM sleep and REM sleep. Non-REM includes lighter and deeper stages. REM stands for rapid eye movement, the stage most associated with vivid dreaming. Across a normal night, you typically cycle through these stages repeatedly. One full cycle is often described as roughly 90 minutes, though it can vary from person to person and across age. Early in the night, more time is spent in deeper non-REM sleep. Later in the night, more REM periods tend to get longer. That shifting balance, deep non-REM earlier, more REM later, is part of the architecture of a night's sleep. So what happens at the very start? When you first drift off, your brain is transitioning away from the outward-facing mode of waking life. Your senses are still semi-open. A sound in the room can pull you back. Your thoughts may feel like loose fragments, images, half-sentences, strange little jolts of sensation. This is light non-REM sleep, the coasting phase of the night. The brain's electrical activity begins to change as networks synchronize differently. Your muscles relax, heart rate and breathing often become steadier. But the most important thing is not one single change. It's the fact that the brain is entering an organized schedule. As the night deepens, you spend more time in a stage often called N2, a substantial portion of many people's sleep. One of its signatures is something called sleep spindles, brief bursts of rhythmic activity that appear on EEG recordings. Spindles are not just interesting squiggles. Researchers have linked these rhythms to memory processing, especially the way the brain stabilizes certain kinds of learning after you stop actively practicing them. You can think of spindles as short conversations between brain regions, moments when the system seems to rehearse and package information. But sleep is not only about storing facts, it's also about deciding what matters. Every day, your brain is bombarded with experiences, some important, some trivial, some emotionally charged, some forgettable. If the brain tried to record everything with equal priority, the result would be noise. One of the big themes in sleep research is that sleep helps with consolidation, taking fragile, newly formed traces and making them more stable, more integrated, and crucially, more selective. At this point in our tour, we can introduce two characters that show up again and again in explanations of memory: the hippocampus and the cortex. The hippocampus, a structure deep in the brain, is often described as a rapid learning system. It can capture new experiences quickly. The cortex, the outer layer of the brain, is often described as more distributed and long-term, building knowledge across time. In many models of sleep and memory, there is a dialogue between these systems. During sleep, patterns of activity related to waking experiences can be replayed and gradually integrated, shifting dependence away from the hippocampus and into broader cortical networks. The details are complex, and researchers still debate the fine print, but the overall story is that sleep provides conditions for that dialogue to happen effectively. So the first part of the night is not merely rest, it's an organized transition into processing mode. Now we're going to move deeper. In the next part, we'll enter slow wave sleep, often called deep sleep, where the brain's electrical patterns become large and slow, and where some of the most dramatic nightly maintenance seems to take place. We'll also start setting up the mystery of dreams, why the brain would generate intense inner worlds when the body is lying still in the dark. For now, just hold on to this. Your brain doesn't sleep like a computer powering down. It sleeps like a city reorganizing itself. Quiet streets above, but busy rooms behind the scenes. As the night progresses, the brain often descends into a stage characterized by slower, larger waves of activity, slow wave sleep, sometimes called deep non-REM sleep. If light sleep is the transition from wakefulness, deep sleep is where the brain seems to commit to the night shift. One helpful way to picture slow-wave sleep is as a rhythm of on and off patterns across large populations of neurons. Instead of the busy, desynchronized chatter of waking life, many neurons fall into coordinated cycles. It's not that the brain is silent, it's that the brain is speaking in a different tempo. Why would that matter? Because the tempo changes what the brain can do. In waking life, your brain is constantly responding to new input, sights, sounds, tasks, social cues. That responsiveness is useful for survival and learning, but it also makes it harder to pause and reorganize. Deep sleep appears to create a stable environment where certain kinds of internal processing can run with less interference from the outside world. This is where the idea of memory consolidation becomes especially vivid. During the day, you lay down traces, a new name, a route you drove, a concept you studied, a skill you practiced. Many of these traces begin as fragile patterns in networks that can be easily disrupted. Sleep is often linked with the strengthening of certain memories and the refinement of skills, not because sleep magically downloads knowledge, but because the brain continues to work on what you experienced. Researchers studying sleep spindles and other rhythms have described a kind of orchestration. Slow oscillations, spindles, and brief hippocampal events can line up in time, creating windows for information to be reactivated and redistributed. The exact mechanisms are still actively investigated, but the recurring theme is coordination, timing signals that help different brain systems communicate. If you want a metaphor, imagine you're moving files from a crowded desktop into a well-organized cabinet. In the daytime, you open lots of documents, you jot notes on scraps of paper, you leave tabs open. It works, but it's messy. At night, the brain can close some tabs, label some folders, and decide what gets filed long-term versus what gets discarded. Not everything is saved, and that's part of the point. Forgetting is not always failure. Sometimes it's cleaning. And speaking of cleaning, deep non-REM sleep is where another fascinating idea enters the story: the glymphatic system. The brain is metabolically active. Even when you're resting, neurons consume energy and produce waste products. For a long time, scientists wondered how the brain clears these byproducts. Unlike much of the body, the brain doesn't have a classic lymphatic system running through its tissue in the same way. Research over the past decade has highlighted a brain-wide clearance pathway involving cerebrospinal fluid movement through spaces around blood vessels, supported by glial cells, hence the term glymphatic. In animal studies, this system appears to be more active during sleep, and the flow of fluid seems to increase, potentially helping clear certain metabolites more efficiently than during wakefulness. This doesn't mean sleep is a detox cure or a medical treatment, but it does support a compelling function: sleep as a time when the brain's internal environment is optimized for maintenance. So, deep non-REM sleep has two major themes in our story: stabilization and maintenance. But it has a third theme that's quieter and often overlooked: protection from awakening. If you've ever slept through a distant sound but woken up instantly to your name, you've experienced a hint of what the brain is doing. Sleep is not simply unconsciousness, it's a controlled reduction in responsiveness with selective gates that can still open if needed. The brain is still monitoring, but it's prioritizing internal work. This is part of why deep sleep can feel so heavy. If someone wakes you abruptly from slow-wave sleep, you might feel disoriented, groggy, even confused for a minute, like the city's night crews were interrupted mid-operation. That grogginess is not a character flaw, it's a sign that the brain was running a different mode. Now, let's connect deep sleep to the circadian rhythm again. Early in the night, circadian timing and sleep pressure often align. You've been awake all day, and your internal clock is saying it's nighttime. That combination tends to favor deeper non-REM sleep earlier on. As the night continues, sleep pressure gradually decreases. You've already slept for hours, and the architecture shifts. REM becomes more prominent. In other words, the brain doesn't just keep sleeping, it changes what kind of sleep it's doing. That shift sets up the next chapter, because as you approach the later cycles, the brain begins to enter a state that looks in some ways more like wakefulness than deep sleep does. Brain activity becomes more mixed and complex. Certain emotion-related and memory-related regions show heightened activity. The body, paradoxically, becomes more inhibited in movement, even as the brain's internal theater becomes more alive. That state is REM sleep. In the next part, we'll step into REM and ask a question humans have asked for as long as we've had language: why do we dream? We'll look at what REM is, what it might be doing for memory and emotion, and why the brain would simulate experiences when the real world is offline. We'll keep our feet on the ground, no miracle promises, no medical claims, but we will explore one of the most surreal, universal experiences of being human. For now, remember this: the night is not one smooth pool of darkness. It is structured, and deep non-REM sleep is one of its most powerful pillars. A stabilizer that helps the brain file, protect, and maintain the system you rely on every day. At some point in the night, usually after you've moved through lighter and deeper non-REM stages, the brain enters REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. From the outside, REM can look peaceful. Your body is still, your eyes may flicker beneath closed lids, breathing can become less regular. But inside the skull, the story changes dramatically. REM sleep is often described as a paradox. The brain shows patterns of activity that resemble wakefulness more than deep sleep, yet you're still asleep. It's also the stage most strongly associated with vivid dreaming, those immersive experiences where you can feel fear, joy, urgency, confusion, desire, and awe, all generated internally. So what is the brain doing in REM? A careful answer is multiple things, and researchers are still mapping the details. But we can describe a few major themes that consistently appear in the science of sleep. First, REM seems linked to emotional processing. Neuroimaging and physiological studies suggest that during REM, emotion-related regions can be active, and there's evidence that REM sleep physiology is connected with changes in how the brain responds to emotional experiences after sleep. In one frequently cited study, REM sleep was associated with an overnight reduction in amygdala reactivity to previous emotional stimuli, alongside changes in connectivity with regulatory regions, suggesting a role for sleep in recalibrating emotional brain responses. This is not a promise that REM sleep will fix emotions, and it's not a clinical claim, but it does support a plausible function. REM may help the brain revisit emotional experiences in a different neurochemical context, potentially changing how strongly they trigger the system the next day. Second, REM is associated with vivid internal simulation. Dreams are not random noise. They often have themes, social situations, threats, unfinished goals, strange combinations of familiar people and places. You might dream of being late, being chased, losing something important, discovering something amazing, or revisiting a memory with surreal alterations. One reason dreams feel so real is that they recruit sensory and emotional systems. Your brain can generate a convincing experience without external input, because perception is not just passive reception, it's active construction. When awake, the construction is guided by sensory data. When dreaming, the construction is guided by internal signals, memories, emotions, associations, and spontaneous patterns in neural networks. Third, REM may support certain aspects of memory and learning. Sleep as a whole is associated with memory consolidation, but different stages may contribute in different ways. Non-REM stages are often emphasized for stabilizing declarative memories, facts, and events through coordinated rhythms like spindles and slow oscillations. REM has been discussed in relation to emotional memory and procedural learning, and also creativity, making novel connections between distant ideas. The point isn't that REM is the only stage that matters. The point is that sleep appears to be a full night process, with different stages offering different computational environments for the brain. Now let's address one of the strangest features of REM: why your body doesn't act out your dreams. During REM sleep, the brain strongly inhibits most skeletal muscle movement. This is often described as REM atonia. It's a protective mechanism. If you're dreaming of running, fighting, or leaping, you don't want your body physically performing those actions in your bedroom. The system isn't perfect, and sleep researchers study disorders where this inhibition is reduced. But in typical REM sleep, the body is largely kept still. This creates an eerie edge case that many people have experienced at least once: sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis happens when the boundary between REM and wakefulness blurs. Your mind becomes aware, but the body's REM-related inhibition lingers. It can be frightening, especially if it comes with dreamlike imagery or a sense of presence. In a non-medical, educational context, the key point is simple. It's a mismatch of states, not a supernatural event. Understanding that can make it feel less mysterious, even if it's still unpleasant. So why do dreams have such bizarre content? Because the dreaming brain isn't trying to produce a coherent story for you. It's running a mode that blends memory fragments, emotional tone, and associative links. The narrator part of your mind, the part that insists everything must make sense, often comes online later, either in the dream as a storyline generator or upon waking when you try to interpret what happened. Think of REM dreams as the brain exploring a possibility space, recombining pieces of your life, testing emotional reactions, strengthening certain links, weakening others, and integrating new information into older frameworks. Some dreams may reflect concerns and stress. Some may be pure nonsense. Some may replay a memory. Some may create a symbolic version of a problem you're working on. Researchers still debate the purpose of dreams themselves, and there's no single proven explanation that fits every dream. But REM sleep as a biological state is clearly real and structured, and it repeats across nearly every human night. Let's zoom out to the full night again. A typical cycle of sleep moves through non-REM into REM, then repeats. The first REM period tends to appear roughly 90 minutes after you fall asleep, and REM periods often lengthen later in the night. This has a practical implication. The final hours of sleep often contain a larger share of REM. If you frequently cut your sleep short, you may be disproportionately cutting the later REM-heavy cycles. That isn't a medical statement, it's simply a description of common sleep architecture. And now we can connect REM back to the circadian rhythm. Circadian timing doesn't only influence when you feel sleepy, it also influences how sleep is organized. The brain's night-day schedule affects body temperature rhythms, hormone rhythms, and the timing of alertness and drowsiness across the 24-hour cycle. In other words, sleep is not just hours in bed. It's a process shaped by both time since awake and internal clock signals. In the next part, we're going to pull these threads together. We'll explore how the brain coordinates these stages like movements in a symphony: slow-wave sleep, spindles, REM, each with different roles. We'll return to the glymphatic system and discuss why deep sleep is often emphasized in brain maintenance conversations. And we'll look at why consistent timing, aligning with your circadian rhythm, often makes sleep feel easier and more restorative. For now, take this with you. REM is not a glitch in sleep. It is one of sleep's most distinctive features, a nightly period where the brain becomes a vivid simulator, revisiting emotion and memory in a protected internal space. A full night of sleep is not one long, uniform descent. It is a repeating pattern, cycles that change shape across the night. Early on, deeper non-REM sleep tends to dominate. Later, REM becomes more prominent. That shape matters because it suggests that sleep is not a single function. It's a package of functions delivered in a schedule. If we return to the city at night metaphor, the first part of the night is heavy infrastructure work, stabilization, repair, system checks. The later part includes more of the internal simulation and emotional recalibration that REM is often associated with. Together, they form an architecture. Researchers often describe sleep in terms of stages: N1, N2, N3, deep slow wave, and REM. Across the night, you cycle through these stages multiple times. A cycle is commonly described as roughly 90 minutes, though real human sleep is variable. Within that architecture, specific brain rhythms seem to play special roles, especially in N2 and N3. Sleep spindles, for example, are brief bursts of activity that appear primarily in N2. They are correlated with aspects of learning and memory. When researchers track spindle activity, they often find relationships between spindles and how well certain memories are retained after sleep. This doesn't mean more spindles automatically equals genius, and it doesn't mean you can hack spindles easily. But it does support the idea that the sleeping brain is not idle. It is actively organizing information. Deep slow-wave sleep adds another layer. The slow oscillations of N3 create broad timing windows that may help coordinate communication between the hippocampus and cortex. In simplified terms, the hippocampus can be thought of as a fast notebook and the cortex as a long-term library. Sleep may be one of the primary times those systems exchange information efficiently, gradually integrating recent experiences into broader knowledge. This is where the concept of memory consolidation becomes not just a buzzword, but a nightly event. Consolidation can mean several things: strengthening memories you want to keep, integrating new information with old knowledge, extracting patterns, the gist from many experiences, letting go of details that don't matter. In daily life, you may notice this as the feeling of waking up with a problem clearer, or a skill slightly smoother, or a concept more graspable. Not always, not magically, but often enough that it has become a consistent topic of study. Now let's return to the glymphatic system, because it sits at the intersection of maintenance and sleep stages. The glymphatic concept proposes that cerebrospinal fluid and interstitial fluid flow through brain tissue in a way that helps clear metabolic waste products, with glial cells playing a central role. In a major animal study, sleep was associated with increased clearance and changes that could facilitate that clearance. In human beings, researchers continue to explore how fluid dynamics, slow waves, blood flow, and respiration may coordinate during deep sleep. The details are technical and evolving, but the broad idea remains compelling. Deep sleep may be especially suitable for certain maintenance processes. It is a state with distinct physiology, distinct rhythms, and distinct priority settings for the brain. Again, a careful note: this does not mean sleep is a cure or a medical treatment. It means sleep is a biological state with features that appear well suited for upkeep. So how does the brain decide when to run this entire architecture? That's where the circadian rhythm returns as the central character. Your circadian system is not a simple sleep switch. It's a timing network. It helps create a daily pattern in alertness and sleepiness, and it coordinates other daily rhythms like body temperature. One of the ways circadian timing affects sleep is by shaping when you feel naturally sleepy and when you feel naturally alert, even if you're tired. That's why someone can feel a second wind late at night, even after a long day, and also why waking at certain times can feel dramatically harder. Light is a major cue for this system. Darkness supports nighttime signals, bright light supports daytime signals. This is why people often find that getting consistent morning light and keeping evenings dim make bedtime feel more natural, an observation that aligns with the idea that the brain uses light input to calibrate timing. The underlying physiology involves the brain's clock systems and the way melatonin secretion is linked to darkness signals. From a documentary point of view, it's remarkable. Your brain is running a timekeeping program that tries to predict day and night, and your sleep is easiest when your behavior cooperates with that prediction. Now, to keep this grounded, we should mention variability. Not everyone's circadian preference is the same. Some people are naturally earlier chronotypes, others are later. Age shifts circadian timing. Schedules can push you out of alignment. Travel can disrupt it. But the principle remains: sleep quality often improves when sleep timing is consistent, because the brain can anticipate sleep and run its night program more smoothly. At this point in the story, we've covered the structure: cycles, stages, memory rhythms, REM dreams, and cleaning. So what's left? What's left is the lived experience, what it feels like when this architecture works, and what it feels like when it's disrupted, without turning this into medical advice. In the final part, we'll walk through a few common non-clinical experiences, why you may remember dreams more on some mornings than others, why the last hour of sleep may matter, and how simple consistency helps the brain run its night program with fewer interruptions. We'll end with a calm conclusion: sleep as an active brain process, not a passive void. Morning arrives and consciousness returns so smoothly that it can feel like nothing happened. But the truth is, a great deal likely did. While you slept, your brain moved through a structured program, cycles of non-REM and REM sleep that appear to support memory processing, emotional recalibration, and physiological maintenance. A complete cycle is often described as lasting about 90 minutes, and you may experience several cycles across the night. When you wake up feeling clear, it can be tempting to credit willpower or luck. When you wake up foggy, it can be tempting to blame yourself. But from the brain's perspective, morning clarity is often about whether the night's architecture ran with enough continuity. One reason mornings can feel different is where you wake up in the cycle. If you wake from lighter sleep or near the end of a REM period, you may feel more immediately alert. If you wake abruptly from deep slow-wave sleep, you may experience more sleep inertia, grogginess, and disorientation because the brain was in a low responsiveness mode with large, slow rhythms. That's not a flaw, it's a clue. Another reason mornings differ is dream recall. You don't dream only in REM, but vivid narrative dreams are strongly associated with REM sleep, and REM periods tend to lengthen later in the night. That means if you wake naturally in the morning, especially after a longer night, you may be waking closer to REM and therefore more likely to remember dream content. If you wake earlier than usual, you may cut into REM-heavy late cycles and recall fewer dreams. This is also why some people report that their dreams become more memorable when their sleep schedule changes or when they wake more frequently. Awakenings are opportunities to capture dream content into waking memory. Without awakening, the dream can dissolve like mist. Now, let's return to the idea of memory consolidation, because it's one of the most widely discussed roles of sleep. Across the night, the brain appears to replay and reorganize information. Sleep spindles and other rhythms have been associated with consolidation and the restructuring of memory representations, supporting the view that sleep is a brain state suited to reorganizing what you learned. But consolidation is not simply storage, it's editing. Then there is maintenance, the quieter storyline. The glymphatic research suggests that sleep is a period when the brain's internal clearance pathways can become more active, at least in animal models, facilitating the movement of cerebrospinal fluid and the clearance of certain metabolites. It's easy to turn that into hype. We won't. Instead, we'll treat it as one more reason sleep looks like a biological maintenance window, a time when the brain's internal environment shifts in ways that may support long-term upkeep. So how does the brain decide when to run this entire architecture? That's where the circadian rhythm returns as the central character. Your circadian system is not a simple sleep switch. It's a timing network. It helps create a daily pattern in alertness and sleepiness, and it coordinates other daily rhythms like body temperature. One of the ways circadian timing affects sleep is by shaping when you feel naturally sleepy and when you feel naturally alert, even if you're tired. That's why someone can feel a second wind late at night, even after a long day, and also why waking at certain times can feel dramatically harder. Light is a major cue for this system. Darkness supports nighttime signals. Bright light supports daytime signals. This is why people often find that getting consistent morning light and keeping evenings dim make bedtime feel more natural, an observation that aligns with the idea that the brain uses light input to calibrate timing. The underlying physiology involves the brain's clock systems and the way melatonin secretion is linked to darkness signals. From a documentary point of view, it's remarkable. Your brain is running a timekeeping program that tries to predict day and night, and your sleep is easiest when your behavior cooperates with that prediction. Now, to keep this grounded, we should mention variability. Not everyone's circadian preference is the same. Some people are naturally earlier chronotypes, others are later. Age shifts circadian timing. Schedule